Thank you everybody for joining this afternoon. We have an awesome panel today of industry-leading CISOs. We're going to talk about some best practices. We're going to tell some war stories. I promise you this will be very interesting, engaging content that you're not going to hear too many other places. So with that, let's start with some introductions here to our panel members. I'll do a quick intro to myself. Bill Siegel, CEO, co-founder of Coveware by Veeam. John, why don't you go next?
John Staniforth. I'm a former CISO of Royal Mail. Been a CISO for about 20 years.
Great. Thank you, John. Gil.
Yeah, CISO of Veeam. I've been here 5 years, and before that I was in financial services for about 6 years, and U.S. government before that.
Thank you, Gil. Kevin.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Kevin Gowan. I'm the CISO at Synovus Financial. We're a large regional bank in the southeastern U.S.
All right. And Colin.
Yeah, Lee. You can call me Lee. So I'm the CISO for Catholic Education Western Australia. It's all the way from Perth, WA. I've been there 16 years, so a long time.
Wow. All right, gentlemen, let's dive right into it. One of the areas that we constantly see tension in is the ability to get the tools you need to secure your environment and whether or not those tools fall within your allocable budget in a given period of time. And so, listen, everyone has smart teams, right? Your teams know what you need to do your job safely, how to secure your environment. And when one of those tools that the team thinks that they need isn't available to them, it's plain as day, right? So how do you handle situations where you're not able to get the exact thing that you want and you know that your team wants and you're pretty sure your organization needs, but you've got to make that decision, and also you've got to communicate that decision to your team who might be frustrated. Lee, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, being education and non-for-profit, we talk about finances. We're very, very restricted, I guess, in a term of I can't generate more money. The only way we get more money is more students, and there's no way to increase that in a short time frame. So I can use the example of we've rolled into Veeam Data Cloud to protect our Office 365 infrastructure. So it's over 90,000 users, over a petabyte of data. It's a big field. But to get there, whether it was Veeam or when we went out to market to have a look at what was there, it's an expensive cost, right? So immediately cost is going to be one of the barriers for us to go through. Our organisation, Catholic Education, we're there to deliver quality Catholic education to our students. We're not there to deliver IT. So when we take that to the board, we really have to have the conversation around why we would need this over hiring another teacher or getting some teacher assistants in there. So they're the barriers that we have to face. We have those conversations with the board and with our community, and then with my team, depending what the answer is, to really show that what's important. So for in this example, obviously protecting our sensitive and student data is very important to the board. It aligns to their strategy, so that's how we got through. But what we did to soften that blow was ensure we hired someone to come in, do a bit of efficiency work on our Microsoft Azure platform. And with some cost savings, we went and said, look, we need some money. I don't need it all. I've been able to save a little bit, so how about we can work through this way? So.
Thank you, Lee. Kevin, maybe follow up from your perspective on the U.S. side, dealing with a heavily regulated industry as well.
Yeah, I have a bit of an advantage in that being in financial services, highly regulated, so there's always a focus on regulatory requirements, and you can leverage that to a degree. The challenge is if you're only doing things as defined by regulators, right, you're missing the bigger picture of what you're trying to do within your security program. So there's a little bit of that balance of the must-do and the really things we should do. Probably the biggest focus for us when we're having those discussions with the rest of the executive team, the boardroom, is from a risk management perspective. Because ultimately it's a business discussion when you're contending for funds. So, why are we doing this? What does this mean in terms of risk to the business? What does it mean in terms of business impact? And we also try to make sure that's a continuity, right? So we're talking about things over time and in roadmaps and how we prioritize things and how we're managing risk, as opposed to just a random, I need money for this, and I need money for this, and I need money for this, right? Because then you drive yourself to feeling like a cost.
Yeah.
So it's trying to bring some business context to it.
Yeah.
I think if I could just jump in here, there's some commonality between smaller, underfunded organizations and large financial services organizations that have resources to do more. But it really all begins with understanding what your needs are, right? And doing that introspective assessment of your controls so that you can prioritize really what you need. And in a world where everything's a priority, nothing is. So, DRMM, NIST cybersecurity framework, assessing your gaps will really go a long way into determining where you need to spend your money, but also help you to justify where to make those investments.
And I think that's probably one of the last things I would say. We obviously, the title of this session is our cyber resilience. Also a little bit of personal resilience. It's okay to go and maybe you don't get the funding you need the first time. You need to have that personal resilience with you and your team to say, great, what do we need to do? So is it go do the DRMM, have a look to say, hey, now I can better articulate why this is the most important thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question to John. As you can see here, John was the former CISO of Royal Mail. When a CISO is looking at a new job, right?
Yeah.
I've seen this a lot with the customers that we work with. We get a great relationship with the company and the CISO, and they end up moving on to another company. And there is what I would imagine, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, a deep need to underwrite a prospective new company that you're going to work for's ability to fund the security budget. But as a job applicant, essentially, how do you approach that with potentially limited leverage to get information about the resources you're going to need to be successful, or are you going to walk into a situation where you're essentially set up for failure? How do you approach that, John?
Because I've done this in quite a few companies, I suppose I've developed my own method, which is really understand why that company wants to now focus on cyber. So in Royal Mail, it was a 500-year-old company. They were trying to move into sort of the digital world from sort of physical movement of parcels, where literally somebody would put a parcel into a post box in Scotland and it would turn up in London and nobody actually knew how, because it was just sorted through. So for that organisation, it's finding out what's the journey you're trying to undertake, why do you care now about cyber, and how important is it on your scale. I think then it's a case of quite often the board or the non-execs are sort of also focused on big companies, or even private equity companies are focused on, we need to protect our revenue, but they don't actually understand the difference between that concept of I don't want any cyber incidents and the reality of how much money that might cost them, how much time. So that goes back to that sort of the risk management. So if ransomware is your thing and you've identified the 20 or 30 key controls you need for ransomware, you may only be able to deploy some of them a piece at a time over several years. You've got to manage that situation with the exec team and go, even if you gave me $50 million today, I couldn't spend it in a year. Right. It takes time to put in a platform, your backups. You've got to identify your key applications. So I tend to use what's the business need for compliance, what's it need to operate, and what's it need to make its revenue. And if you take those three and use the horrible word crown jewels, then where those three sort of circles intersect on a Venn diagram is where you start.
Yeah, and how far do you go in terms of, let's say you hear all the right things, we're going to make this big investment. At the end of the day, your employment contract probably isn't going to list those things out in a schedule at the end. So how far do you go to try and get those assurances?
20 years ago, I was grateful to get a security job. I think many of us were. We were like, yay, we've given a job. I'm a bit more picky now. So after I've had a job offer, I'll quite often have another conversation with the hiring managers before I actually make a final decision. Yeah. So I'll try and find out culture, attitude, etc. So I've got a bit more picky as I got older and more experienced, but not all of us get that chance. And sometimes that's where you see sort of CISOs hop into a company and within 6 months hop out.
And Bill, you made a great point in your keynote about the culture of security in a company. And I think when you're going through a selection process or an interview process, you can really gauge what that security culture is by just talking to the right people. And that, I think, goes a long way in assuring that you might be stepping into a role that you could actually get some stuff done.
Yeah, you can get a sense pretty quickly of whether it's taken seriously at all levels of the company, right? Or is it that's an operational thing, you go take care of that, make sure there are no incidents, make sure nothing happens. The level of discussion, the quality of the discussions, and the access you have to the rest of the executive team and to the board, right? Are they asking you questions independently? Is there actual meaningful dialogue? Is it treated as an actual risk to the enterprise? or is it just viewed as an operational thing that you guys do whatever you do?
And sometimes part of your role coming in is you might have had the hiring manager and a couple of others talk to you in that way, but part of your job is to help sell it and explain
That's
it to
right.
others. So with my teams, your first point is try to often explain to security and technology teams, the CFO came to be an accountant. Mm-hmm. They didn't come to be a security person. The head of marketing came to sell things and do marketing. So our job is to educate them, and that's a learning curve in itself, I think.
All right. Next topic here is dealing with transparency and communicating both tactical and strategic shifts in your investments and or your security strategy, and how and when to communicate those things broadly to the IT organization. I'm going to tell a quick fun war story today to tell you about the absolute wrong way to do it in a micro instance, which is I'm not going to name the company's name, but it was big, it was global, they had tens of thousands of endpoints, they got hit with ransomware, every single computer was encrypted, and they needed to decrypt every single computer. Now, when you run a decryption process, a box pops up on the screen, and it's pretty clear what's going on inside that box. They were like, we don't want our users to know if they happen to be looking at the screen what's happening. Can you obfuscate it or in some way change the UI of the dialog box while it's running? And I literally, on the phone call, looked at them and I said, you must think your own employees are idiots if they don't already know what's going on here. So absolute wrong way to do it. So let's talk a little bit about how we communicate and how we deal with transparency. Gil, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, big secret, the way to be transparent is to be transparent, right? It's a bit of a different situation here at Veeam. We are a resilience company. The culture of security here is incredible. We've got top-down support from the CEO, the COO, the board. Everyone gets it, but it wasn't always that way. So my approach to transparency is bringing our user community and our contractors and whoever accesses our IT systems along for the ride. And we do that through training, awareness, education. When there's an incident, we share what we can. There's some privileged communications that you can't share. But the idea is to make sure that they're along for the ride. They understand the value of what it is we're doing, especially when we're changing the controls environment, right? We've all worked at places where things change in terms of the way you access systems, or MFA gets quickly introduced, but you're not told why. So I think the best practice there is to bring those users along for the ride, explain to them what the threat is, how it's changing, how our controls have to change to match it, and make them part of the solution.
Lee, what's your perspective here?
Yeah, I like the terms, the transparency, but radical transparency. So we're a little bit unique, I guess. Like all organizations, I have the board and I have executive that we present to. We quite often, so at least once a quarter, we'll go through the roadmap with them, make sure we're on track. We do a 3-year security roadmap. Obviously, year one, the year that you're currently in, is pretty good. Year 3 is made up and will always change. Mm-hmm. That's how it is. But we do like to say, hey, these are the things we're thinking of as we move forward. What I also do is once a quarter present that back to our IT managers at our schools, right? So as Catholic Education, I have 162 schools. About 50 of those have permanent IT managers that look after those sites, right? So while they don't directly report to me, they all use our system and the system we provide them. They have the access that we give them. They deserve to be along that journey, that transparency. We want to show them the same roadmaps, and when they change, we want to explain to them why. Obviously AI is everywhere, but when we shifted a few things around to say, hey, we really need to focus on data security posture management right now, because if we want to be able to enable AI, we need to do it safely on our data. So by doing that, we said, hey, these things now that we said we're going to do in quarter 2, 2025, right now, we're going to push that back a quarter, because we're going to really focus on how do we implement this DSPM and how do we work with you to ensure it's safe. So I guess for me, I'm looking in 2 directions to make sure we're bringing our wider team, so not just the IT team, but those IT managers along, as well as the board. So trying to be as transparent both ways as I can.
John, any perspective?
Yeah, I'm fully on board with both. I think a lot of people see cyber and information security as like a black art. And so basically, if you're not transparent with people, it really upsets them. So just saying, wear a seatbelt on your car with no explanation of actually it could save your life, it could save your children, it can actually help you, that explanation, I think, goes a long way. So I was in one organisation, I used to pay £50 as I travel around the world to anyone who challenged the security policy. So we could actually get that interaction, sort of force some creative behaviour and really sort of help people understand the why. Sometimes we changed the policy because it worked out it was a stupid way we'd written it, or the actual intent wasn't coming across correctly. So, yeah.
Kevin, do you find that within a heavily regulated organization, it's easier or harder to perform this task?
It can be easier in the short term, but ends up being ineffective if the approach you take is we have to do this because, right? I think what's more important, and all my colleagues have referenced it, right, is that you want to give people some context for why this matters in their terms.
Yeah.
Right? It's very easy to talk in our terms, right, or the regulators' terms. Yeah. I'm doing it because they said so. And I think the reality is there's business reasons behind all of these things, and we need to understand them for ourselves. Our team members need to understand them so they're delivering that same message. And I think that's how you effectively engage with the lines of business, the people you're supporting, right? I'm here to help you. I'm not the Department of No. I'm not the information prevention team, right? We're trying to enable what you do, and this is why what we're talking about doing helps you do that. And I think that opens a lot of those doors. But it takes a while. That's an investment.
Yeah.
And I think targeted messaging. So, trying to teach frontline users about spoofing. Why do they care? And I think some of the traditional security sort of training and things has been splat every message to every person.
Yeah, so a good example in our industry is, in education, QR codes have been viewed as the coolest tool ever for the last 10 years. Well, right now, especially this year, phishing, phishing with QR codes, has hit education as the number one attack vector. We're seeing that through email everywhere. So having to go back out and say, well, not only do you have to be aware of that, but you also need to teach your students now, because you've just spent 10 years telling them, hey, look at all these QR codes, scan everything, it's great. Yeah. So it's the transparency all the way down to enable the teachers to do the right thing to the students as well.
Right, QR codes have that something about it, right? It's like engineered legitimacy. It's not a link, it's a QR code.
Yes.
So it's got to be safe, right? All right, we can go to the next slide here. Actually, if you could go back one on the Q&A. So we're going to talk a little bit about change management. And this is a great way to lead with why. I've sent this around to a lot of different organizations that resist putting MFA. So this is an actual transcript of a snippet of a negotiation with the bad guy where we're ascertaining the initial demand. And then this is the guest one below that this is essentially leading with what we call a low anchor. We're posturing that we don't need anything from them and we're probably not going to pay. And we know what they're going to say next, which is their threat of what they're going to do if they don't pay. And this one had an added little twist on it that we've put in bold in here, which is that the threat actor actually went through the CEO's individual emails and found the one where the CEO was like, take this stupid MFA off of my computer, it's slowing me down. And that led to a big part of the attack kill chain. So Steve Jobs always says, lead with why. Well, here's why. So when you are trying to communicate change management, especially change management that is going to potentially slow down business, but we have to be okay with that slowdown, that we're making an informed decision that the pace that you have to slow down to, an extra 30 seconds, is worth the dramatic reduction in risk that we're going to realize by implementing whatever the security control is. But obviously, in big organizations, you can't sit everybody down and be like, I know this is going to be tough, but you're gonna make it, So how do you do that scalably, especially within a large organization? Lee, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, going back to how we work with those IT managers at schools, it's a really great way to sell the message, to have those proxies to sell the message for you. So we'll use MFA as the example. We've got 14,000 teachers out there. There's no way that I can contact them all, and if I did, they're not going to read my email. So the way we did that campaign was attack the principals first, like get the high-level people, get the IT people, and then give everyone the dates that their site is going to be transferred over, and then set up the little meetings where if they have an IT person, they can have in the meeting, hey, this is what we're going to do, or we can do it. Some of the things we also did to prepare is try to understand how a teacher would use, how it would impact them actually in the classroom, because impacting them in their admin time or at home is different. So we reviewed what are tier 0 apps that are going to ask for MFA every single time. Actually, none of those are going to be used inside the classroom. Well, that's okay. So their normal MFA, that'll be fine. They'll have their 15 days before it expires. That's good to go. Knowing that, what's the next step? We reached out to the union and we said, hey, we're going to do this. It's for the benefit of the teachers themselves, benefit of the students. Do you have any objections? And they're like, no, we think it's great. So we covered that base as well. So before we even reached out to the community to say this is what we're doing and why, we made sure that everyone they would reach out to had the same information that we had, so we could get the same consistent messaging going through, whether it was a union or their own IT at the school.
Yeah, this one is really interesting to me. I think in the world we live in today, it's amazing to me that, I mean, this is a recent message, right? So this just happened not too long ago with the CEO trying to subvert his own team's controls and gets him in trouble. I find it amazing that anyone would still have that attitude with the way that we've reported on these incidents over time. These are existential threats to companies, and most CIOs didn't get to their jobs because they're stupid, right? They're really smart people. They're CEO of a company. They should understand this, and I think for the most part they do. I think sometimes you have a little bit of hubris and arrogance that causes this kind of thing to happen, but you got to have honest conversations with them. And just to maybe a shout out to the guy in the Team McLaren jacket here. We don't put brakes on the McLaren to make it go slower. We put brakes on the McLaren to make it go faster. So that's why we've got to share that message with the CEOs. They have to understand that there are a lot of bad things that can happen if we're not focused on the blocking and tackling that we need to be focused on. And it could cause an existential event for them, the company, and maybe others.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I'll spice this up a little bit because I can't tell you how many times you get off an initial scoping call on an incident, and the CEO's like, Bill, can you just stay on for a few minutes? I just want to talk to you. And they're like, listen, they might find some things in my email that, it's all fine, but you're just like, oh God, So explaining to them that this is, listen, you probably are talking, I'm sure it's all above board, but the contents of your personal inbox are potentially going to be in the paper.
That's right.
New York Times. Don't you want to make sure that doesn't happen, right? Kevin, any perspective here?
Yeah, I think what's also important, what's helped us, we try to help people understand the why before the what. Because the what's, it's a thing. It's something they're going to have to go do. And some people you're going to have to kind of hold their hand to get through it, particularly executives. But we focus on the why. The other thing we try to do, especially at the top level of the company, is get outside voices in to talk about why these things are important, right? That's part of the education and awareness. And it's not just Kevin saying you need to do this, right? It's here's why this is a risk to your organization. Here's why it's a risk to our whole industry. Here's the kind of things people are doing. Here's where your program is, here's some thoughts on what you ought to be doing. And that supports it, but also gives the message this is not just one person's opinion on why this is a risk.
I think also the sort of the training and readiness for an event, right? If you're not doing training and readiness on handling an event, then you're really behind the curve. You've got to bring in the non-technical people so that they can understand what their role is going to be, whether that's legal, your media folks, your finance team, just folks that you wouldn't ordinarily bring into an IT outage. Those people need to understand exactly what's going to happen on the worst day of their life when there's a breach at their company. And helping them understand their role in that process, I think, could also help them understand a little bit more about the threat and remind them that they don't ever want to be in a real incident,
Right.
For real.
Yeah, John, it's a tricky balance between trying to scare people into action versus injecting that right amount of paranoia that you hope just sticks for a little while to give them some perspective and change their behavior, right?
So pick up on actually how I address that one is I have a one-pager for each executive officer, and in training back to targeted, I have a one-to-one conversation with each one way before the incidents. And that's normally when they start to ask but could this really happen, or what does that mean? Because when execs are in the same room, they don't actually want to give up ground in front of each other. Because bluntly, they're all there, senior, and they're all sort of fighting for their territory, their budget, etc. So you start having those one-to-ones. And I said, brief them, you're chief marketing, you own the clients, you own all client comms during the cyber crisis. I can't do that for you.
Yep.
What are two very big clients? Maybe US government, I'll jump on the call for, but other than that, I'm not owning that as a CISO, and that starts to really help that accountability, and they start to get real. And then give them some live examples. I had 100,000 people in the company and just said to the head of HR, how are you going to pay them if the HR system goes down? Forget whether it's a cyber incident, it might just be an outage, massive SAP platform, how are you going to pay everyone? She didn't know. So we got the CFO together and said, well, we'll rerun the payroll via the bank. Mm-hmm. But those conversations start to make it feel more realistic, I think.
Yep. Yeah. There's a the threat actors use it, which is the emotion of shame, which is a very powerful emotion, and we can use the sort of specter of that, like, listen, you're putting your company. For executives in these sorts of cyber extortion incidents, with the recent uptick in swatting against the executives and their family, you're potentially putting yourself and your family at risk by doing this. Like, don't let this thing that I'm trying to do be the reason that your wife gets a bouquet of funeral flowers from the threat actor, which we've seen before, right? It's going to terrify her and your children, and they're going to be like, Dad, how'd you put us in this situation, right? Yeah. Don't let that happen. All right, let's talk a little bit about, we've got about 15, 18 minutes left here. Bridging the gap between technical understanding of what is going to occur during an incident and the non-technical executive understanding of what is going to occur, right? Classic situation, we talked about this yesterday, non-technical business executive had looked at a PowerPoint presentation or something along the way and said, RTO, 15 minutes, so that means the maximum any bad time can be is 15 minutes, and I can take a coffee break and we'll be back up and running by then, which we all know is not reality. These things are extremely nuanced, they're extremely complex. So Kevin, starting with you, how have you found over your career to be a constructive way to bridge that gap so that the first time it's realized isn't during an incident?
Yeah. It's certainly education and awareness, and I think to John's comments, right? You've got to help them understand what that moment is actually like, not what's on paper, not what you saw on someone's website, right? Here's the reality. So we do frequent exercises, but more than just the high level, check a few boxes so you can say you did an exercise, to actually get people immersed in it, and with our board as well. So we did a ransomware exercise both with our executive team so they could understand the internal impacts and some of the things you talked about, right? The HR person understanding payroll system is down, right? What does that mean for you? The salespeople, what does it mean when you can't get to your customer relationship management platform, all those things. And also for the board, try to help them understand both the reality of what an event's going to be like in terms of scope and impact and time, and also what their role is and what their role isn't, right? Yeah. We're not going to be asking you to make the decisions. You're not going to be being called every 5 minutes. So you need to understand your critical role and what it is, and you need to understand there's some things you're going to hear about because management's made decisions, but there's just a lot of investment in time in helping people understand what the actual event is going to be like and to get feedback on it. And we learned a lot of things every time we do tabletops. And exercises, we get feedback, we find things we need to change, things we might not have understood the business impact. So that's the biggest piece, and we put a real focus on that.
Yeah, I think the wargaming is, it's really important for companies that can pull those off, and bringing in that broader team as part of that exercise and making it as real for them as possible. And you discover all kinds of interesting things when people are under stress, even in a simulated environment. Suddenly your CEO and your CFO realize that, oh my God, we're not making the right investment here. Maybe it's time to relook at the way we're funding this program. But I think the initial idea here, the thing that works best in my experience, is bringing those folks along for the ride. Like I said before, giving them access and insight into the deliberations that are going to happen on a real weekend when the what hits the fan.
And bringing in folks with outside expertise who've been through this with a lot of clients. Folks like your organization and others to challenge you more, right? It's really easy to do your own exercises and satisfy yourself, and you haven't really put the bar in the right place. bringing in someone else to help you learn, understand, critique what you've done, I think is a really critical piece.
Yeah, and then they'll come, and if you have someone that's professional facilitating a tabletop, they can design these injects to bring up a specific conversation that you really want to have. And if you do it yourself in a scripted way, it's very difficult sometimes to confront those issues that really need to be confronted.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you the worst tabletops, and I've sat in on them, I won't facilitate them, but I've sat in on them, are the ones that are so heavily scripted and spoon-fed that it is literally like watching, you know, like bing, 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 bing,
a waste
bing,
of time.
bing. 45 minutes later, everyone pats themselves on the back and leaves, and we'll do it again next year. And it's like, you guys have just given yourself this horrible false sense of security. You've practiced nothing. The best ones, as like Gil mentioned, you're designing injects not only to raise a certain point that you know is an issue, but is designed to create a conversation between members of the organization that aren't naturally going to interact with each other on their day-to-day, but will have to during an incident. And the most rewarding thing that I see during incidents is you see people further down the food chain often connect.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we've never met before. And they work together on an incident, they have fun, they talk about an issue, and now you're like, those two are gonna work together well. They're gonna talk about the issue ad hoc, outside of meetings and plan things, and they're gonna take initiative on their own. And if you do that across the organization, you've created this fabric that is now gonna come together and work way better during an incident than if you hadn't brought them together to create those natural relationships. Lee, any perspective on this before we jump?
Yeah, just we talk about tabletops a lot. What we've found recently is, you know, a few of our executive members had changed, that recently new. We actually had an external person come in and redo our BCP planning. And that was really interesting because the executives and the people they brought in for each vertical, I guess, for everyone to understand what really is important and what their expected time for either downtime or if we lose this, what does it mean? And you know, we're education. A school can teach without internet for a certain amount of time. But really to get them to understand what is important has really helped us launch like those conversations and that thought process. Because you had a lot of people in there that were new people that had just assumed, oh, everything's IT. We use IT to access this, so it must be an IT problem. Well, no, this is you. But then to take that into a tabletop now where they're not coming in completely blind, they now understand their role a little bit more. Like I said, it wasn't set up to do that particularly, but once I started to see the conversations happening in that BCP, I was like, man, this is going to make our tabletop exercises much more enriched because their thinking is in the right space.
Yeah. All right, John, let's talk a little bit about your firsthand experience. We can go to the next slide, the last slide here. So John had an incredible experience. I'm sure if you'd use the word incredible, but for us on the outside looking in, it was quite a remarkable incident to have a firsthand a view on. What I'm curious about early on is, you know, the first, you know, day 0 to day, you know, day 2, day 3, when you're just getting your arms around impact, right? Which can be one of the hardest things to do, especially in a large organization, right? You obviously can't move forward until you know what's happened and how to deal with it. Give us a sense of what that was like during the incident that you went through, and maybe give the audience a sense if they don't know what that incident was as well.
Yeah, so quick background, Royal Mail you may have heard of if you've watched the TV, oldest postal organisation in the world. Part of our business that looks after sorting parcels to send internationally runs lots and lots of sorting equipment. So I think in feet it's nearly 1 million square foot environment with about 3 miles of pulleys and conveyor belts that do parcel sorting to multiple countries. 630,000 parcels a day leave the UK, and basically there's on average sort of 2 or 3 days of storage because obviously you want everything moving all the time. We went down for only 6 weeks. So on the first day, a lot of it was what's the actual problem? The ransomware, the business just saw machinery stop working. So they ran their IT function, their engineering function, thinking it's just another sort of machinery fault. They dialed in. The guy, it was early in the morning, saw his AD server looking like files were being encrypted, locked it down, So he thought, got in his car and started driving to work. It was about an hour's drive in. Meanwhile, while he's driving in, the local machines wake up and start spitting out a ransomware note on the local printers. And one of the members of staff photographs it and puts it on Twitter. In parallel with this, I get a phone call saying from one of my colleagues what that is going on. And I've just been on conference call since early in the morning, so I'm in between calls. Haven't you read your email? And basically somebody had reused one of our crisis management emails from some industrial action to basically try and call a meeting. And it was a subsidiary part of the organisation, not the core. So that sort of kicked off. So 4 phone calls later, I get the phone number of the site director. I have 1,500 sites. So of course I don't know everybody in the company. So COO, work down the chain, get the phone number of the guy on site. I'm saying what's going on. That's when the Twitter thing happened. Because we're regulated, it's a private company, but regulated by the government, we had MPs, the privacy regulator, various others, clients all ringing up, asking what was going on. And of course, you've got your data privacy person saying, well, is there any client data involved, any customer data involved? And so you're in this journey of discovery. And to your point, we had, by the time you've tried to pull out a network diagram, figured out if IT have ever maintained a network diagram, because we all know that that stuff's really fun to maintain, it's too late. So I was just saying to technology, just cut off those sites. So every site that was international had an OT network. Some of them had a corporate network. We didn't know where the bridging was. So basically it was just shut them down. To your point about getting other functions involved, we'd already unfortunately had some sort of data breach warnings and some other crisis management things in the past. So legal, compliance, privacy were all on the phone. I just said, start finding out, is anyone contacting us for the contact centres, our social media accounts? At that point, we'd had no direct inbound contact apart from the notes. So that's sort of the framework.
So total chaos, basically.
So total chaos. I spent 2 days actually in the same meeting room I set off. It was in London. I used to live about 300 miles north. So 2 days of close, lived in this meeting room for 2 days without leaving it, got food delivered, and on the second night got an Uber down to the local site, which is at Heathrow Airport. And I think I lived there for about 7 weeks before I got home. So somebody went and bought me clothes and various other things going on. Carbs work though. So one of the lessons learned is my team ramped up to 200 people. I tend to have a wicked sense of humour, so lots of chocolate, lots of pizza, lots of carbs, and just using that to sort of give people sort of a sugar boost at certain points in the day.
Well, this is a good question, actually. I want to stop you on that. How did, one of the things we talk about is your labor quickly becomes your scarcest resource.
Yeah.
How did you, obviously this is going to be a big long-tailed incident. You know that, right?
Yeah.
How did you approach not just destroying your teams physically?
Yeah.
So that they could persist through what is going to be a weeks-long effort.
Yeah, so luckily back to your very early question, I'd already prioritised response over anything else, over other controls, because I had such a big program to address. So I called out my retainer company to our normal sort of retainer response. We had lots of outsourcing, so I was able to leverage not just the security, but also IT outsourcing to start with. And with my own team, I'll be honest, I ran pretty much 48 hours no sleep. A couple of my managers did the same, and everyone else I put onto 12-hour shifts. And then this happened on a Thursday. By the Monday, I went back to sort of normal shifts, so sort of 8 hours at a time. I ramped to 200 people in about 3 days. I had to put in physical people on the doors to search everyone's bags. There were 2,000 people in the site. The site director's saying, what do I do with these people? They can't sort parcels. Right. We had the wider business, 100,000 people, plus everyone from the board through. So probably 70% of my time was on comms, which was my biggest surprise as a CISO. So I was working 18-hour days with 70% of my time just on managing the comms across everybody, consistent messaging. Then you've got the people that want to find out the what and the why from the executive team down. Mm-hmm. And the reality is our most important thing was moving parcels. So back to the business mission, what was important was shifting parcels, because both the storage, but also that was our service. The CFO had already had previous discussions, and he'd said if there was ever an incident, we'd true up later with our customers. So we'd still take parcels in. Individual consumers would pay at the counter like normal, but big businesses would just shove the parcels in if we had outages, and then we'd true up afterwards. So we'd had some of those sort of discussions that you mentioned during tabletops.
Yeah, it's good of you to have those relationships. That's not what Colonial Pipeline did, by the way.
No, you're right. Little tricks that I've pre-did, and this is lessons learned over 20 years, is I pre-agree with the CFO and legal that I can sign contracts as long as they're not multi-year, and I can avoid the normal PO process. Because I don't know what it's like in the States, but most companies I've worked in, the PO process is horrific and can take days, if not weeks or months. So pre-agreeing that, pre-agreeing spend.
Yep.
All spend went to one cost center. So even hiring warehouses, trucks, extra. So don't forget we had to ramp the business side, which I wasn't involved in. So I have my business colleagues, to your point, own, well, if you need 2,000 extra people to start sorting parcels manually,
I think
that's up to you.
Like the most well-prepared organizations for something that you had to suffer through are the ones that do what you did. They pre-position assets, capabilities. They've got relationships with outside counsel because trying to struggle through a contract with an outside law firm in the midst of an incident is just going to be nearly impossible. Having retainer IR firms, like you mentioned, having Coveware, someone like Coveware ready to negotiate on your behalf. All that stuff you can do before you have an incident, and it'll pay off in huge dividends in the middle of a stressful
exactly. And back to money, also that stuff isn't necessarily high cost. So paying for a retainer, doing some of those things might be cheaper than buying a new DEDR. Sure. And at least you're saying, well, I can respond to the fire
Right.
if we're likely to have it in the new circumstances.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
Lee, you've been through some incidents as well. Curious from your perspective.
Yeah, so I guess for me, some highlighted points, when we've had a data breach, we found we really had a weakness when we ran tabletops the executive team knew what they were doing, the HR team, everyone in the office. Right, I said we have about 14,000 teachers. The office is really only 400 people. Yeah. So those 400 people were pretty clear on what to do, but that's not where the incident is. Yeah. Right? When the incident is at a school, the principal, who is effectively acting as the CEO of that site, they're the face to the parents, and the parents are our customers, right? They're the ones that bring their kids there. Now, without them being in our tabletops, without having to organise that, we realised that there's a big gap there. Their expectations for updates. In the issue that we had, we were pretty lucky. We were able to find it, and within the first 4 hours, everything was locked down, and we were able to find out what it was and start the investigation. But a true investigation takes time. Yeah. And they were expecting updates. Oh, have you got an update today? Like, can we close this? Can we tell the parents it's all done, see you later? Well, no, and yes, we've told them that this is the potential data that has been lost. Okay, cool, but can we close it now? Well, no, because we've still got to do that investigation. That was really a really large gap where we thought we had everything covered. You look at a tabletop and you get the people in the room. We had the right people, but we didn't understand the right people in our organization from that view. So we've changed that now, and that's how we're trying to move forward that way.
Yeah, it's a good perspective also of why good advice is important, because you have to put your resources towards things that are actually going to help. And one of the things I've heard lawyers and crisis comms and myself personally is you are going to get outrage as the response to any communication you get. Capital One informed like 500 million people in 48 hours. Mm-hmm. Outrage. Change Health took them months. Outrage. Same response, so it doesn't matter, right? Yeah. Right. So you might as well don't worry about it. You can't win that one. No. Put those resources towards what you can win, which is a key customer, right? Or doing something to scale your recovery side. Yeah. We have a couple, just like 1 or 2 minutes left. Any questions we can answer from the audience? Go ahead and just shout it out.
Yeah. Did the Royal Mail pay the ransom?
No. So basically, we stretched the negotiation for about 3 weeks as part of our strategy, and then basically, once we were comfortable, we had the files we cared about, we understood what they would release publicly, and we went through that process. We had lots of decision trees about paying or not paying. We decided not to pay. Yes.
How long did it take you to become normal again?
So parcels for the customers was back up in 6 weeks, but not in terms of the normal operation. The full recovery took the best part of a year.
Ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, this is Monica Mistreta from Mexico City with the press. My question is, you never mention anything about audits, third-party audits. You don't run them? Because you mentioned something about bringing somebody from outside to your tabletops. That's what you call it. But you didn't mention audits. Are they important?
I think
Yeah, well,
audits now. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just internally, right, we've got kind of first line defense, second line defense, third line defense. So there's a very robust internal audit organization whose job is to provide independent challenge. And they report directly to the board. But also part of what we do is bring in third party to assess the overall program or elements of the program. I did that fourth quarter last year and had them report directly to the board as well. So there is independence. And then we have our regulators come in on at least an annual basis and do a very similar thing, right? Completely independent, looking at program gaps, risks, and providing, findings or overall ratings of our safety and soundness.
Last question
Thank
right
you.
here.
Yeah, for tabletop exercises, surprisingly enough, my IT team, my guys aren't very good actors. And so how do we get a realistic, appropriate tabletop? Because what you described as a bad one, this is kind of what we end up getting, where we have a run, a playbook, and it's just kind of canned responses. And you just said that's the worst thing you could do. So can I get some?
Gil, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I think if you've got the resources, any of the big four firms or any cybersecurity firm will gladly take your money to help facilitate, design, and run a tabletop exercise. I've seen near peers in certain industries provide that service to each other, just as a matter of courtesy. So there are a lot of interesting ways to get to that point. But as Bill mentioned, the idea of having an outsider there injecting, interesting injects into the conversation, it's invaluable. And it leads to all kinds of good conclusions in my experience.
I would add, the content is out there. It's not so proprietary that you can't find it from your peers. The other thing I would add is break it down into smaller chunks. You don't have to do a full day exercise.
No.
Full day exercises are super disruptive, right? People have day jobs, right? Do an exercise for an hour and a half or 2 hours on a small specific area, and do that every quarter.
Yeah.
Right, and then that does two things. Not only can you focus on it a little more, the burden of creating the content is lower because maybe 5 or 6 slides. But more importantly, I think you develop we're going to do this regularly, folks, right? Everybody gets in the rhythm of we need to practice this, and then you organically come up with ideas of things to practice, and then it's not a whole wow, who's going to prepare it this year? Because the reality is it's not that much, it's not that big of a burden to actually prepare for it. We'll be up here available for any follow-up questions. We want to release everybody to the rest of the calendar. Thank you so much to the panelists today. Thank you so much for participating.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you, Bill.